Jake Morrison had been running his salvage station for 3 years now. It wasn't much, just a converted cargo hauler he'd bought cheap and filled with tools, spare parts, and enough coffee to keep him going through long, endless repair jobs. He'd been through enough chaos in his lifetime, both during his 12 years in the Marines and 5 more working on warships. So now he welcomed the peace and quiet of fixing broken engines, patching leaks, and sometimes pulling drunk idiots from asteroid fields. Boring work. Safe work. The kind of life he'd been craving. His AI assistant, Barry, always seemed to have suggestions. The AI had a knack for coming up with snappy names and ideas, but Jake wasn't interested. His station was simply called The Wrench, no frills. Barry suggested alternatives, but Jake ignored them all. After all, it was practical, and so was he. The AI's name, too, reflected Jake's sense of humor or lack thereof. "Boss, we've got 3 jobs lined up for next week," Barry announced one morning as Jake worked on a busted plasma coil. 2 routine maintenance calls and 1 retrieval job. All paying decent. Jake grunted in acknowledgement. "Good, maybe I can finally fix the shower properly." "You've been saying that for 8 months, Jake smirked. "And I'll keep saying it until I feel motivated enough to actually do it." But just as Jake was about to return to his work, the signal hit. It was a jarring, insistent presence that filled his head. It wasn't coming through the comms or the speakers, it was inside his skull. The sound, or rather, the feeling, vibrated through his bones. His vision swam, his stomach twisted. It felt as if someone had reached into his mind and started screaming directly into his thoughts. A sharp, desperate agony. Barry's voice was calm, though clearly concerned. "I'm not detecting anything on conventional frequencies. Whatever it is, it's not showing up on sensors." Jake could feel it, though. He didn't need the sensors to tell him something was wrong. It was pure, desperate, endless pain. And somehow, impossibly, it was calling to him specifically. His chest felt tight. His skin prickled with unease. His hand trembled slightly as he wiped grease on his pants. "Barry, what the hell is that?" Every empathic species within 50 light-years just jumped to faster-than-light travel and left, Barry reported, his voice a mix of factual and a touch of nervousness. "The Centauri embassy is filing formal complaints. 3 ships have emergency evacuated from the sector." Jake shook his head. "And you're not detecting anything?" "Nothing on the scanners?" "Not a thing, boss," Barry replied. "I think this might be one of those human things," Jake groaned. Great. Humans and our weird abilities. Of course, he hated it when Barry brought that up. The galaxy's other species always found human sensitivity to certain phenomena unnerving. Jake, though, found it more of a nuisance than anything. Still, the signal persisted, and it was growing stronger, pulling at him like a hook in his chest. Every instinct told him to flee, but Jake had never been the type to listen to his instincts. It's how he'd survived wars, black holes, and countless other death-defying events. "Plot a course to the source," Jake ordered. His voice was resolute, even if his mind screamed for him to turn away. "Boss, that's in the dead zone. Nobody goes to the dead zone." Jake frowned but didn't hesitate. "Yeah, well, nobody's screaming in their heads either, just me, so we're going." "Jake, this is a bad idea. Buddy, I've made a career out of bad ideas." He stood, grabbing his toolkit and sidearm. "Start the engines." Barry was quiet for a moment, processing the words, before complying with a small sigh. "Aye, boss." The journey took 3 hours. With each passing minute, the signal became worse, louder, more painful. By the time they arrived at the coordinates, Jake's headache was unbearable. He'd thrown up twice already. Whatever was out there was in serious trouble. Finally, they reached the source. Jake stared out the viewport, his breath catching in his throat. What he saw almost made him forget how to breathe. Out in the dark, floating in the emptiness of space, was something that shouldn't exist. A ship, but not just any ship. It looked as though someone had taken an entire moon, carved it into the shape of a massive vessel, and covered it with glowing purple crystals that pulsed in sickly rhythm. The ship was enormous. Jake's entire station could fit in what looked like a minor cargo bay. "Barry," Jake said, voice a whisper. "What am I looking at?" "Scanning now." Barry's voice was hesitant. "Oh no, boss." Jake's stomach turned. "That's a Leviathan-class world ship," Barry continued. They're supposed to be extinct. The architects made them thousands of years ago before they vanished. Is it alive? According to these readings, yes, barely, Barry said. And it's covered in void barnacles. Those crystal things are parasites. They feed on consciousness. Jake felt his heart sink. He could feel the ship's agony now, clearer than ever. We need to help it, he said, his voice hoarse. Barry hesitated. We're a 2-bit salvage operation, Jake. That thing is ancient alien technology. We don't understand it. The council classified these ships as forbiddens. If they find out we're here, I don't care about the council, Jake cut him off. I'm going. Jake launched himself toward the massive Leviathan-class ship, his boots magnetized to the hull as he approached the floating behemoth. His heart hammered in his chest, and his mind raced. Every inch of him screamed that this was a terrible idea. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was something he had to do. The presence that had called to him was stronger now, almost tangible in the air, as if the ship itself was pleading for help. The moment he touched the hull, the world around him seemed to warp. The signal no longer just a sound flooded into his mind, and he was overwhelmed with images, pain, despair, a long, endless drift through the dark where even time seemed to lose its meaning. His body trembled as memories of dying stars, of civilizations rising and falling, swirled through his thoughts. The voice came, weak and ancient, breaking through the cacophony of images. Please, end this. I cannot die, cannot rest, please. Jake gasped, pulling his hand back from the ship's surface. His heart raced, his breath shallow as his mind reeled from the connection. That wasn't just a machine. That was something alive, something that had suffered for millennia. He swallowed hard and steadied himself, forcing his breath to return to normal. The voice, though faint, reached him again. Who are you? Jake pressed his palm against the hull once more. I'm Jake Morrison. I'm a human, and humans, we're good at doing impossible things. His voice was steady, even as the ship's consciousness pulsed with anguish around him. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you, I promise. A long pause stretched before the ship responded, the voice still weak but now tinged with something Jake hadn't expected. Curiosity. Why would you help me? Jake hesitated. Because you asked. For the first time in over 3,000 years, Two's the name he had now given to the Leviathan felt a flicker of something beyond despair. Hope, perhaps, but it was so faint, so fragile, it could have been a dream. Jake pulled away from the hull, his thoughts swirling. The magnitude of the situation was only starting to sink in. This wasn't just a damaged ship. It was a sentient being that had been tortured for an unimaginable amount of time. And for some reason, it was reaching out to him. As he made his way back to his station, now parked just off the ship's enormous structure, Jake's mind raced. This wasn't just a routine salvage job. This was something far beyond his usual skill set. He wasn't even sure how he could fix this. How could he save a ship that was older than any human civilization? A ship that had been subjected to parasitic torment for thousands of years. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jake set up a makeshift lab inside one of Two's massive corridors, using his station as a base camp. Inside the ship, the corridors felt like something alive, soft organic walls that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light. As Jake ran his fingers along them, they felt warm, like skin. The deeper he moved into the ship, the more he understood. That Two's was not merely a vessel, it was a world in itself, a world that had been slowly dying at the hands of something insidious. Barry, ever the skeptic, was less than hopeful. Boss, these corridors go on for miles. I'm detecting what looks like organic computing systems, self-healing metals, even what might be artificial gravity generators that work on principles we don't understand. She's not just a ship, she's an entire world. Jake ran his hand along the walls, marveling at the ship's construction, but his awe was tempered by the overwhelming sense of decay. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of damage. Void barnacles, parasites were everywhere, clustered along the walls in thick, pulsating growths. The crystals glowed faintly, their eerie purple light casting strange shadows across the once vibrant walls. He paused in front of one of the larger clusters, his breath catching in his throat. Up close, the void barnacles were even more unsettling. Crystalline structures that shifted and changed when he wasn't looking directly at them. The longer he stared at them, the more they seemed to pull at his thoughts, like they were trying to invade his mind. He stepped back, shaking his head. This wasn't just some parasite. This was something far more dangerous. Barry's voice was cold, factual. I'm detecting that these barnacles are networked. They're not just feeding on Two's energy. They're feeding on her consciousness too. Jake's stomach dropped. He could feel the truth of it. Through his connection with Two's, the barnacles weren't just draining her life force. They were feeding on her thoughts, her memories. Slowly, deliberately, they had been keeping her alive just enough to keep. Feeding. This is torture, Jake muttered, his voice thick with disgust. He had seen horrors in his life, but nothing like this. He wasn't sure who would have created these barnacles, but whoever they were, they had condemned Two's to a fate worse than death. For the next few days, Jake threw himself into studying the barnacles. He took samples, ran tests, and pored over the data, trying to find a way to remove them. But every solution he came up with ended in failure. Cutting them out would kill Two's. Using energy weapons would destroy her fragile organic systems. Chemical treatments wouldn't work. The barnacles were too adaptive, evolving faster than any treatment Jake could think of. This is impossible, Barry said, after Jake's 15th failed test. There's no way to remove them without killing her. Jake sat down heavily on the floor, his eyes never leaving the samples of the barnacles under the microscope. He was silent for a long moment, his mind working furiously, trying to think of a solution. His professors back in engineering school had always said he had a talent for seeing solutions no one else could see. And they'd also said he was reckless. Both of those things were true, but what if? Jake thought. What if he didn't need to? Remove the barnacles? What if he could fight them from the inside? He stared at the microscope, an idea forming. He wasn't sure if it would work, but he had to try. Jake sat in his makeshift lab, staring at the vial in front of him. It was clear liquid, almost harmless looking, but he knew that inside it was something far more dangerous. The serum he had crafted was an amalgamation of his own blood, mixed with Two's defensive systems. The antibodies he had isolated were aggressive, adaptable, and he hoped just what he needed to fight the barnacles that had been slowly consuming the ancient world ship for millennia. Barry, Jake muttered, rubbing his eyes. I'm about to do something crazy. How's the ship holding up? Not great, boss, Barry replied. Two's is still deteriorating. The barnacles are fighting back harder now, injecting toxins into her systems as they die. You've got to move fast. Jake nodded, the weight of the task settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew this wasn't just a test of his engineering skills. It was a gamble, a dangerous one. If he succeeded, maybe, just maybe, he could save Two's, but if he failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for the ship, but for the countless lives that depended on it. His fingers hovered over the vial. The antibodies in the serum were aggressive, designed to attack and neutralize the barnacles from the inside. But the risk was enormous. If something went wrong, the serum could turn on Two's own systems, possibly killing her in the process. You sure about this? Barry's voice was laced with uncertainty, even though it wasn't directed at him. You're injecting an experimental bioweapon into a living, sentient ship. It's dangerous, Jake. Jake's hand tightened around the vial, feeling the cool glass against his palm. He'd always been reckless. He knew the risks. But he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not when he could feel Two's pain, not when he could sense the desperate need for help that pulsed through every corner of the ship. If we do nothing, she stay in agony forever. I can't let that happen. If it goes wrong, she dies. If I do nothing, she's already dead, Jake said quietly, his voice firm. I'll take those odds. Barry went quiet, then sighed. Understood, boss, but if this blows up in your face... It won't, Jake cut in, his voice unwavering. He had to believe that. Jake took the vial in both hands, staring at it for a moment longer before walking down the dark, organic corridors of Two's. The air in the ship felt thick with history, with the echoes of a once mighty civilization. Jake's footsteps echoed as he moved, his boots magnetized to the floor. Every step was deliberate. Every step brought him closer to the heart of Two's. When he reached the central chamber, a vast, pulsating space that felt like the ship's soul, Jake paused. The walls here were alive, flowing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed as if they were breathing. It was beautiful, but it was also dying. The barnacles had spread too far, and the parts of Tews that still functioned were fading. He could feel her consciousness pulsing faintly, a weak presence that was struggling to stay alive. "Okay, Tews," Jake whispered, his voice almost a prayer. "This is going to hurt. But it's the only way." He knelt down, finding a major conduit that connected to the ship's nervous system, its heart. Carefully, Jake injected the serum into the conduit, watching as it slowly disappeared into the organic matrix of Tews. The moment the serum entered the ship's systems, everything changed. Jake gasped as a flood of sensations overwhelmed him. It wasn't just the ship's systems he was connected to now, it was Tews herself. Her consciousness crashed into his mind, and the pain, the agony she had been enduring for thousands of years, flooded his thoughts. He felt it deep in his bones, in his very soul. The raw, unrelenting torment that had been inflicted on her. It was unbearable, and then, as if an answer, something else, something new began to shift within her. The serum was doing its work. The barnacles were being attacked, their parasitic network beginning to unravel. Jake felt the chaos in her systems as the parasites fought back, flooding Tews with toxins and corruption in a last-ditch effort to preserve themselves. The barnacles were intelligent, but they were no match for the combined force of Jake's antibodies and Tews' natural defenses. For a moment, Jake thought he was going to lose it. The psychic feedback from the ship was too much. He could feel her systems shutting down, parts of her dying, but he could also feel something else, the parasites dying with her. The toxins spread throughout the ship, destroying the barnacle network bit by bit. Tews screamed. But it wasn't a sound, it was pure agony that reverberated through every inch of his body. Jake screamed with her, clutching his head as the pain intensified. He was on his knees, tears streaming down his face, struggling to hold on. The connection between him and Tews was stronger now than it had ever been, and it was as if he was experiencing her suffering firsthand. For 10 terrible minutes, Jake wasn't sure if he had killed her. He held onto the wall, trying to maintain his composure, sending her thoughts of comfort through their link. He didn't know if she could feel them, but he had to try. And then, slowly the pain began to ease. The screaming stopped. The pressure in his skull lifted. Jake opened his eyes, his breath ragged. He looked around, blinking away the tears. The barnacles closest to the injection site had turned black, crumbling into dust. The walls around him began to glow faintly, a soft, warm light that had been missing for so long. It was working. "I can feel sections of myself again?" Tews' voice came, stronger than it had been before. It was weak, but it was there. "Systems I thought were lost forever." Jake let out a breath of relief, his body shaking with exhaustion. "Yeah, it's working, but this is just the start. We need to keep treating you section by section." As Jake moved through the corridors, injecting the serum into different areas, he began to feel something he hadn't expected. Hope. Tews was fighting back. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was healing. It would take time, but for the first time in millennia, Tews had a chance. The days following the initial injection were a blur of activity. Jake barely slept, working tirelessly inside Tews, administering the serum to the different parts of the ship. Each new section he treated brought progress, but it was slow. The barnacles, despite being a near-constant presence in Tews' systems for thousands of years, were fighting back with everything they had. Their network of parasites was crumbling, but they didn't go down without a fight. Jake's connection to Tews had deepened. He could feel her mind more clearly now, as if their consciousnesses were becoming intertwined. It wasn't just his hands fixing her. It was his very presence within her systems, his empathy for her pain, that made a difference. She was no longer the distant, broken thing that had begged for mercy. She was fighting. And with every part of her that healed, she became more alive. But it wasn't over yet. One of the final sections of Tews' systems was the core, the very heart of the Leviathan-class world ship. The area was massive, and the barnacles had spread through it like a cancer, blocking essential systems and threatening to shut down the entire ship. Jake had been avoiding it. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew that this would be the true test. If this last section failed, the ship could die. Barry's voice crackled through his helmet as Jake prepared to make his way into the core. "Boss, this is it. We're almost done, but the core is different. It's heavily damaged. and there's a chance the serum won't work here. Jake gritted his teeth, adjusting the tool belt around his waist. It has to work. Jake, we've been through this. I'm just telling you to be cautious. If the barnacles spread their toxins too fast, you could lose everything. Jake didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced down at his hand, still slightly trembling from the previous treatments. He had pushed himself harder than he had in years, but this was the final stretch. This was where Tuz either lived or died. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what was to come. I've got one shot at this, Barry. I can't afford to fail now. The core was unlike anything Jake had seen before. It was vast, and yet it pulsed with an almost ethereal, organic energy. The walls of the core glowed with soft, swirling light. And Jake could feel Tuz's consciousness pushing against his, strong but delicate, as if it was taking all her remaining will to survive. The barnacles here were thick, more concentrated than anywhere else on the ship, and the light from the crystals had a sickly glow. It was as if the parasites had become a part of the core itself, woven into its very fabric. Jake moved carefully, his boots clicking softly against the floor, the air cool against his skin. Barry, I need a full read on the system as I approach. I've got your back. Be careful, Jake. You're about to go into the belly of the beast. He pulled out his scanner, his hands shaking slightly as he examined the readings. The barnacles. Here were not just feeding on energy anymore. They were feeding on the very essence of the ship. The core was dying. If they didn't act quickly, Tuz would be lost. Jake approached one of the largest clusters of barnacles, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the strain on the ship, the desperate need to end this nightmare once and for all. He unscrewed the vial of serum, ready to inject it into the core. But just as his hand reached out, something shifted. He felt it before he saw it. An overwhelming wave of darkness flooded his mind. The barnacles, in a last-ditch attempt to protect themselves, had begun to fight back. Jake staggered back as a psychic scream ripped through his skull. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was anger, malice, a collective consciousness bent on survival. The barnacles weren't just parasites. They were sentient, and they were desperate. Jake! Get out of there. Barry shouted through the comms, panic evident in his voice. They're fighting back with everything they've got. The darkness in his mind intensified, the barnacles' network flooding his thoughts with visions of endless suffering, of worlds consumed by the parasites. Jake tried to steady himself, but the weight of it all threatened to crush him. The connection was too strong. He could feel the barnacles tearing at Tuz, pulling her deeper into madness. And he knew that if he didn't act now, she would be lost. No, Jake whispered through gritted teeth. I won't let you die, not now. He took a deep breath, clutching the vial tightly in his gloved hand. His own blood, now part of Tuz's systems, coursed through his veins, mingling with her own consciousness. He felt her will to live, her desperate desire to survive, and he knew that the only way forward was to finish what he had started. With a shaking hand, Jake plunged the needle into the core, injecting the serum into the central conduit. The moment the serum entered the core, the ship's systems went wild. The barnacles fought back with ferocity, but the serum human made, infused with Tuz's own defenses, was unlike anything the parasites had encountered before. Jake cried out in pain as the psychic feedback hit him like a wave of electricity. The barnacles were dying, but not quietly. They fought, scrambling against the serum's effects as the toxins spread through the core. Jake gritted his teeth, focusing on Tuz's presence in his mind. He could feel her. She was still there, weak, but still fighting. Then, as suddenly as the storm had begun, it stopped. The silence was deafening. Jake opened his eyes, gasping for air, his body trembling from the psychic strain. He stared at the core, his breath catching in his throat. The barnacles were gone. The sickly purple glow had faded, replaced by the soft, warm light of Tuz's organic systems coming back to life. Slowly, the walls of the core began to pulse with energy again. The ship was healing. Tuz's voice, stronger than it had been before, filled his mind. I am alive. Thank you. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, tears welling in his eyes. You're welcome, he whispered. Just hang in there a little longer. We're not done yet. He stood up, his legs shaky beneath him, and glanced around. It wasn't over, not yet, but it was a victory. Tuz was alive. She wasn't out of danger yet, but Jake had bought her time. Barry's voice broke the silence. Boss, you did it, it's over, you really did it. Jake let out a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, I guess we did. But this isn't over yet, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Right, Barry replied. But you saved her, and that's something. Jake looked out at the core, feeling Tuz's presence flood through him once more. Yeah, he said quietly. I think we're just getting started.